My name is Michael Mosser. I'm a lecturer in the International Relations and Global Studies Department in the Government Department and in the European Studies Center here at UT. It is, in many respects, an organization that was artificially created but has developed in some respects organically over time. It does much more now than it did before. It originally, in the 1950s, starts off with coal and steel, two industries that were widely perceived as what were called industries of war. You need coal to make steel, you need steel to make weapons. By 1958, the Europeans had said, well, let's keep going, let's integrate further economically, and let's begin to go down the road towards increasing the scope, not just the scale of the European integration project, but the scope. We'll do more things. And so they integrate economically in everything from agriculture to transport to pretty much every other economic sector that you could think of. And by the 1990s, the European Economic Union, or the European Economic Community, had transformed itself to the European Union. They incorporate things like common foreign and security policy, where now the European Union begins to be an actor on the international stage with a foreign policy. They incorporate things like justice and home affairs, where they begin to collaborate on internal security policies, they begin to collaborate on asylum policies, they begin to collaborate on immigration policies, all these sorts of things. And then the European Union goes even further and finishes the single market internally. They create, in the Lisbon Treaty, an External Action Service, which is essentially the European equivalent of the U.S. Department of State. They've got a foreign minister for all intents and purposes now who oversees European foreign policy. So from a governance standpoint, the European Union is doing is taking on many functions of a traditional nation state. So the euro, the common currency of the European Union, shared by 17 countries, 18 as of January 1st when Estonia comes in. And there will be every other country that has joined since 2004 is required to accept the euro at some point. It is required to switch their currencies over to the euro at some point in the future. So eventually every country except for 3 inside the European Union is going to have the euro. Britain, Denmark, Sweden are the 3 countries of the European Union who have gotten what are called the opt-out from the criteria for the euro. There are a bunch of countries who have the euro now who are not thrilled with the euro. They feel like the euro is dragging them down. If they had their own currencies again, if they went back to have their own currencies, they would be able to do what countries do. Countries who are in control of their own economic destiny they have levers, they have control over both levers of macroeconomic policy. The monetary policy lever, that's minting money, that's interest rates, that's all the sorts of things that you see what we do with the U.S. Federal Reserve and the dollar, for example. And the fiscal policy, that's taxing, that's spending, that's what we do with Social Security, Medicare, that kind of stuff. States who joined the euro in 1999, who lost control of their monetary policy, they gave it up. They gave up their national currencies to the European Central Bank. They no longer have control over one of those 2 levers of macroeconomic policy. Which means that in good times, the European Central Bank is able to sort of handle major macroeconomic decisions for the entire euro bloc. In bad times, they also handle decisions for the entire euro bloc, but individual countries no longer have the ability to sort of manage their currencies to get out of those bad times. So many countries, especially some of the weaker European countries, and by this we're talking about Greece and Spain and Portugal and Ireland, famously badly called the PIGS, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain. It's an unfortunate acronym, but these are how you remember these particular 4 countries. And to some extent Italy, the other I, they're all euro countries, their economies are very weak. They're stabilizing, but they're still very weak. There are politicians inside those countries who would very much like to renounce the euro and go back to their own national currencies. Right. They can't. Member states can't withdraw from the European Union yet because there's no legal basis in the treaties for an exit of a member state. As the founders envisioned the European Union, it was a project that was always moving forward. It's very much people who study the European Union, who work for the European Union, who talk about the European Union, use the metaphor of a bicycle. That if you think about a bicycle, it's very, very difficult to remain in balance if you're not moving forward. You fall over, right? And that's the analogy for the European Union, is that it only remains upright as long as it's moving forward. So when the founders of the European Union were putting all this together way back in the late 1940s and early 1950s, they envisioned what was the phrase that they used was integration via the back door. No one expected the political integration. No one expected to create a United States of Europe in the same way that we did here. Nobody wanted that. No European government was going to go that far, especially that close, or even that close after World War II. World War II was horrific for the Europeans, but even World War II couldn't promote European federalism in the way that we do here. You know, that's a funny, there's sort of a comic answer to that and a serious one. The comic answer is what not to do, right? I mean, this is, we can learn from the Europeans, but it's not easy, it's not anywhere close to being accurate. The European Union, they win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 for a reason. The European Union, there's no war in Europe with the notable exception of the Yugoslav wars and then the Kosovo War in '99, but there's no world war like we saw in Europe in World War I, II, and sort of no European wars of domination. And you say, well, okay, but the U.S. isn't necessarily going to learn not to have any wars. We haven't had a war on the American continent since, well, the last time the U.S. was invaded by a foreign power was the War of 1812, and the last war on the U.S. continent is the Civil War. So, okay, we're not going to learn anything from the Europeans. Maybe they could learn from us. And yeah, that's all well and true, but the U.S. is a much younger country. We are, in many respects, when the 13 colonies came together to be the 13 states, they shared a lot more in common than the original 6, or even the 12, or the 15, or any of the European nation states, which had had hundreds or thousands of years worth of history. So we can learn, there are lots of things you can learn from the Europeans. We can learn, for example, in the U.S., how to run a modern social welfare state without necessarily breaking the bank or sort of casting the net too wide. In the U.S., we have a left-right split that is far, far more polarizing than the left-right split that you find in Europe. There, again, with the exception of the xenophobic and highly nationalistic right, there, what they call their right wing tends to be pretty center-right here in the U.S. And so I think we could learn about the politics of collegiality. I think we could learn about the politics of consensus-driven cooperation, as opposed to duke it out and let the sort of have a sort of scorched earth politics here in the U.S. and see last man standing kind of stuff. No, there's only one. There's only one European Union, and it is in many respects contextually driven. It develops at a time that was distinct, unique, if you do, in America or in European history after World War II. There was Europe was in a shambles. Europe was attempting to rebuild itself, and it was ready for a radical reinterpretation of international relations. The Americans, having won World War II, essentially give Europe its blessing to continue down this road. We preferred to have the European Union on our side, and so we give Marshall Plan aid and all these sorts of things to keep Europe together. All of this stuff in the immediate aftermath of World War II allows the European Union to develop in a particular way. Again, as I'd said before, the economic integration and then the sort of social integration and maybe eventually political integration, that's all by design and has all sort of worked out in some respects a little bit the way, in some respects as the founders had originally planned. We're still in the early stages of a very long-term process. No other place, no other region of the world looks like Europe. I don't know if we were to put the European Union together again in 2014 if it would look the same as it originally started. I think it was a product of its time. It still exists, and I don't expect it to go away anytime soon, but I don't foresee any other examples of EU-like institutions developing around the world.